I was really blown away by the description of Sally's life. And in some ways, everything at this point has been said that I could say, both about Sally and about the principles of nonviolence, you know. What I found in her life and what has been important in my life, she went to Latin America. She went to the streets of Eugene and met the homeless people here. She went to Oaxaca and saw the struggle and met the teachers. I think that if we're going to make change in the world, we, as many of us as possible, need to get out there where the oppression is, where the struggle is. We tend, and I don't know who's in this room, you know, and what your backgrounds are, but we tend to be very privileged, and we tend to be able to keep ourselves away from a lot of the violence of society. Now, I was a third child. She mentioned that Sally was a third child. I was kind of caught between the cracks, and I've been very aware and inspired by Wellspring's Friends School, because a lot of the people that come here, the students, are between the cracks in the system, right? And turn up here, and a community has been formed of love. A love and caring, and sharing and listening and understanding each other. And that is a very basic premise for nonviolent direct action, is that we learn to listen to each other, to understand each other, and move forward from that base. I have, the first thing that, maybe the first thing, well, one of the things that happened to me in my life was I grew up in a caring Protestant household, and after the war, I heard Martin Niemöller, and I heard about other pastors in Germany. Martin Niemöller was in isolated confinement in prison for 4 years in Nazi Germany for speaking out against the Nazis. And there was another pastor who was assassinated for having spoken out against the Nazis. And I was very inspired. I heard Martin Niemöller speak and to a great big crowd in Boston, and was very inspired. And then I also went to Geneva, Switzerland with my aunt, who had gone to France after the Second World War. I'm 78, so I span a history here. After the Second World War, and she had worked with French war orphans and adopted a French war orphan named Jacques, who was my age, and had lived in poverty and in the occupation and been shot at by German snipers and vastly affected by the war. And I came home after a year in Geneva, very much transformed in terms of my attitude. I said, why does there have to be war? And was led to the Quakers. So that started me. And then in the context of Quakers, I went to a weekend work camp in Boston when I was in college. And I had lived in a privileged neighborhood, you know, and I had never been exposed to poverty. And we went to the inner city of Boston, and we got an analysis why there was such an inner city, why there was such poverty. We didn't only see the poverty. We didn't only say, oh, let's help this person or that person. Let's do charity. We got a feeling for how this happens and what needs to happen to overcome it. And I was very touched by being in the middle of that poverty. Later on, I went to an African-American college in Alabama, Talladega College, for a term. And again, it was in the early 50s. So there still was segregation, and the civil rights movement hadn't risen up. It had risen up a little, but it was still coming, the vital part of it. And so I saw the segregation. I got off the train and wanted a drink of water, and there was a black fountain and a white fountain. I sat in the back of buses. I sat on the segregated train, and then my friend said, now, if a conductor comes along, say you have colored blood in your veins. They had responses, but I realized that they were constantly being faced with this kind of demoralization, being put down in every aspect of their lives, and yet they were holding their heads high and moving forward. Later on in my life, I became a part of the solidarity movement in Central and South America. And I've been down many times, not in the way Sally did, not in the way Catherine did. I never became fluent in Spanish. I studied Spanish, but never was able to become fluent. So my role was, I would say, much more on the surface than theirs in terms of the depth of what they did and learned down there. But going down there, we went to Chiapas after the massacre of the abejas, the bees, a nonviolent group in Chiapas, and they were massacred because the Zapatistas hadn't been massacred, but they had. And we went down in support of the abejas. Later, and you know, again, these people, it's not only the oppression that happens, the awful violent oppression that is also happening in our country, but also the rising up, the courage that people have that affects us when we go down there. And so I went, the most recent time I went was to Colombia just a couple of years ago. There are Colombia, South America. There are peace communities in Colombia, South America.